Good morning, children. This morning session is dedicated to class 10 and 11 and 12 for the elaboration of a very important topic. Education should be meant for developing mind, hand, and heart, all the three. See, there are three dimensions of education. Education is necessarily meant for an all-round development of individual. By an all-round development, I mean the cognitive aspect, knowledge aspect, then the psychomotive aspect, the psychological aspect, and the aesthetic, that is religious and spiritual aspect. That is why now I just say that education must be meant for developing mind, that is the cognitive aspect, hand, that is the skill training of hand, then the third one is heart, that is spiritual and psychological development, aesthetic development. But it is irony to say that the modern education concentrates only on developing cognitive aspect and psychological aspects. The third aspect, that is psychomotive aspect or spiritual and aesthetic aspect, is often neglected by the educators. The fact that in the democratic countries, intelligence is still free to ask whatever questions it chooses. This freedom, if it is almost certain, will not survive another war. Therefore, educationists should do all they can to teach the children the education of hand, head, and heart. Head, of course, that is mind. The children should be taught to rely on their internal resources rather than stimulation of external resources. Children these days have become psychological addicts. What does it mean? Psychological addicts are those who often stimulate the things without any purpose, like listening to music without purpose, watching the films without purpose, using cell phones without purpose, just moving on, wasting time, and then listening to songs without purpose, and reading newspaper without purpose, listening to the public instructions without purpose. All these have made the modern, I mean children, the children of today, psychological addictors. And psychological addicts, they do not develop in them the habit of self-resistant to suggestion. If such resistance is not built up in the children of today, then definitely the coming generation will be will be at the mercy of this skillful propagandist. That is the reason why at JNU, generally a section of the students grow anti-nationalist. This is the result of, this is the repercussion of the lack of education of heart, that is psychomotive development. They are having knowledge, the cognitive aspect is well, developed, the psychomotive aspect is also developed, but they often become the victim of propagandists and the self preachers who have the only intention to misguide the youth for their own selfish gain. And that is the reason why in a section of the students in JNU grow to be anti-nationalists. Therefore, the educators have now the responsibility, the accountability to teach the children right from the early age the education of mind, hand, and heart. A lack of the education of heart results in chaos in intellects. Intellect gets disfigured and distorted because it is not being directed in a right way. Therefore, reliance on external stimulation is always fatal. The children should be taught to rely on their internal resources, and they should always be motivated to rely upon their own spiritual resources and resist the temptation of becoming the reading addicts or the listening addicts or seeing addicts. Because when you are listening without a purpose, when you are listening anything without a purpose, it will not be the education of the head. And when you are reading without purpose, it will not develop the cognitive knowledge aspect. So these three aspects of the learning makes an intellectual purposeful individual and understand the scientific observation. Therefore, it is required that the children of today must be exposed to, you know, spiritual, preachings along with cognitive knowledge. Along with imparting knowledge, it is essential to train their mind, their hand, and their soul, because the education of the soul will build them a complete individual, and they will avoid external stimulation which is always going to harm the nation. And that is the reason why these days there is chaos among the youth. The youth are misguided often by the propagandists for their own purpose. So we have to teach the children not to become reading addicts, not to become listening addict, not to become seeing addicts, rather to be observant, to be specific, to be to be logical, to be to be self reliant, and that will really heighten their resistance to suggestion, and which will purely be an intellectual task. Therefore, we have to teach the children the how to learn to react forcefully to suggestions, and how to analyze and become a critical analyst of those things which harm the body, mind, and soul. And therefore, it is the duty of the educationist to teach the children or impart the children education of mind, head, and heart, all the three. Without the education of the heart, it is just useless. They will just become a robot, a machine. So they should learn to develop in them spiritual consciousness. They should understand that they should never be allowed to expose to external resources of the propagandists, who generally exploit the young minds for their political and other selfish gain. And the children often become the victim of these propagandists. Therefore, we have to give the children essential education to learn to behave intellectually, and they should have the freedom to exercise judicially. They should not misuse the freedom, rather they should be taught to understand the meaning of freedom in a judicious manner. Their mind should be always trained to have resistance to suggestion, not to addiction. And they should always understand that simply listening without any purpose, or reading without purpose, or listening without purpose, or hearing or seeing without purpose will be just a way to become psychological addicts. And therefore, the modern education must aim at imparting the education of head, heart, and hand. All the three dimensions of education need to be developed. Thank you very much. I'm sure this elaboration will open the all the three dimensions of the children. They will think scientifically, logically. They will not become psychological addicts. They will not go for reading purposely. They will not go for listening purposely. They will not go for seeing purposely. Rather, they will be observant, logical, and they will think to develop resistance to suggestions. They will not become the victim of propagandists, and they will not allow themselves to become a subject of exploitation by the propagandist. And therefore, they will develop in them certain educations which will really make them a powerful individual. So the educationists must teach the students to use their freedom judiciously, rely on their own intellectual resources rather than depending on external resources, and they should develop purposeful reading of newspaper, listening, to some information and to exercise their mind, soul, and heart. So, by giving them education of mind, head, and heart, we can make education more meaningful and more productive to the society. That is what I mean to say. Thank you very much. Have a nice day ahead. Thank you.